What is executive presence? You heard me right. What is executive presence? See, I know executive presence is a term that is used a lot in 2025, that everybody wants to show up with executive presence. They're told, you need to have more executive presence. If you want to get to the C-suite, you got to have good executive presence. But the point is, most people never explain what executive presence is. So today, I want to talk about executive presence and my experiences of developing executive presence and the first time it truly hit me what executive presence is. And I want to start with a brief story. I'll never forget it. It was a long time ago, but I'll never forget it. I was the only Black person in the room. I was the youngest person in the room. I'm sitting around the table, and everyone in the room had an executive title. And when the meeting was over with, someone came up to me and said, "You need to check yourself." Now, they didn't do it like Ice Cube would have done it when they said, "Check yourself before you wreck yourself." It wasn't that, but that's how I interpret it. See, the check yourself was really around, you need to tone it down a bit. You need to be more corporate like others. You should think about wearing a different tie. Maybe don't wear that suit anymore. Like, this person was really coaching me and trying to give me some good advice. But really what they were telling me above all else was, don't make us uncomfortable with your authenticity. You need to be more like others. See, at this time, I was in a senior leadership role. I mean, when I say senior leadership role, I was the chief executive, but I didn't wear suits like everybody else wore suits because I was hip hop. Now, when I say hip hop, Sean John was the suit that I was wearing during that day. Maybe a Karl Kani suit might have been something I was wearing. And if you know anything about Sean John and Karl Kani, they don't fit into the Brooks Brothers, Giorgio Armani wardrobe class. Had a little bit more flair and a little bit more style. And if we take it back to the early 2000s or the late 1990s, all of these suits had 4 buttons. Maybe the shoulders were a little bit big. Maybe they had a little bit of pinstripe. So I didn't fit in and look like everybody else in the room. And this person was trying to tell me to check myself, tone it down, be more like others, fit in, look more like an executive. And that's when I understood something, that executive presence is not about fitting in somebody's box, it's how to lead authentically without losing yourself. It's about how you have an impact without losing yourself. It's about owning your own leadership path without losing yourself and what other people define as leadership. And I want to talk about the myth of executive presence that so many young executives, women executives, and people of color think it's all about when they get in the room. They think it's about conforming and contorting themselves to be like somebody else just to have a chance in the room. That is a myth. See, we've seen them all, right? We've seen the executive who walks into the room and we know where they grew up because we went to undergrad with them. But yet when they get into the room, they sound like Carlton from the Fresh Prince. They sound like they grew up in Bel Air. They went to a private school. Their real name is Clarence and they went to Cranbrook. They sound like somebody else. They're trying to be somebody that they're not. And when we see them walk into the room like that, we lose respect for them because we know who you were. We remember who you were. We remember how you showed up. But now you have walked into the room and are pretending to be somebody that you're not. And so many young executives, executives of color, even women to some degree, try to be somebody that they're not, to be more like a man when they walk into a room. And listen, I'm not just talking to you about my story and my experience. I'll never forget, I worked with some senior executives, and this executive came to me and really told me what her boss said to her. See, her boss was in the C-suite, and her boss was perturbed that she didn't show up into the executive room the way she showed up. See, her boss was taught that you got to have some cojones when you come in the room. So her boss was very braggadocio, really performative, and tried to be intimidating and said, you need to be more like a man. She literally said that to this executive. You need to be more brash like a man when you show up in the room, and then you'll get more respect. When this leader had no trouble getting respect, this leader had no problem getting respect. This leader had executive presence. But her boss, who was also a woman, had this mistaken belief that you needed to be somebody else when you show up at the executive table. And that's wrong. That is not executive presence. Again, executive presence isn't about fitting in the box of what you heard about as a C-suite executive, or what you heard about as a good corporate executive. That if you want to be CEO, you got to do these 4 or 5 things, and that checks the box and puts you in the room. It's not about any of that, but it's about owning your leadership path without losing yourself in the process. Now, when I mean own yourself without losing yourself, it's about confidence and not arrogance. You got to have extreme confidence to know that you deserve to be in the room. You got to have confidence in your abilities, confidence in your insights, confidence in the expertise. See, I had no problem with confidence because I know that the reason why I was the youngest person in the room, the reason why I was the only person of color in the room, because I had something that other people didn't have: insights, knowledge, expertise, relationships. I had power amongst power. I knew that, and they knew that, and that's why they asked me to be in the room. So I just needed to walk in there confidently in who I am and what I know. And yeah, I will add that the confidence of hip hop music and culture is with me everywhere I go. So I can't divorce myself from the hip hop. Hip hop is who I am. Leadership is what I do. So there's a level of confidence that comes with you when you are a hip hop head like I am. The second thing that leadership is, and when I say owning your leadership without losing yourself, it's the clarity without being taken back by the pressure. It's clarity under pressure. So when you get into the highest levels of leadership, there's always going to be pressure situations. Some kind of major resignation or some shakeup. Maybe the stock price is falling. Maybe you had a crisis. Something happened, right? And you got to be a leader who can speak clearly, lead clearly, and show up with the clarity of thought in your brain around what you're doing when you're in that room. So it's clarity under pressure. That's what the best leaders have. The third thing that leaders have when they own the room and they know they have good executive presence is that they have credibility that earns trust. Credibility that earns trust. So your credibility is what you have done prior to the point that you entered into the room. Are you a reliable person? Have you delivered on the value? Were you meeting the goals and the metrics? Have you knocked everything out of the park? See, when I got invited into that room the first time and I was the youngest and the only Black in the room, I had all of the metrics. I had delivered. I had all of the value. There was no question of my contributions. My contributions were evident. And so that gave me a level of credibility that built me some trust. So the question you got to ask for yourself is, what credibility do you have that is building you some trust? And the next thing I want to say is consistency. See, consistency is in how you show up. I preach to teach and lead leaders in this space all the time. And here's one thing I want you to know about, consistency. Consistency is showing up every day, not running from the crisis, not running from the challenge, not running from anything that might be a problem or a pain point, but it's just showing up consistently. So again, you got to have confidence, you got to have clarity, you got to have credibility, and you got to have consistency. And do not fall for the myth that this is about perfection, that this is about your addiction, this is about your degree, this is about the school that you went to, this is about them 15 certifications that you got, and that you continue to go back to school to get another degree, thinking that's going to put you closer into the room. Here's what I want you to know. I've been down that pathway before. I went and got a master's degree because I thought it was going to help me to get into the room. But then when I got the master's degree, I never took it out of the envelope that they mailed it to me in, that I never framed up my master's degree. I never put it on a wall anywhere. Nobody ever asked me what my master's degree was in. When I got to the table, nobody cared where I got a degree from. Nobody. What they cared about is what I knew. What they cared about is what I could deliver. What they cared about was my insights and my expertise. That did not come from the school that I went to. It came from this PhD in street knowledge that I got. And not street knowledge is just in hood knowledge, but working in the streets, in the communities that I worked in, working with the people that I worked around. Like, my expertise was already there. So don't fall for the myth that this is about your addiction. This is about your degree or the school that you went to or the color suit that you wear, the tie that you wear. Like, somebody literally told me to don't wear that tie no more. Don't wear that tie anymore. They were trying to get me to fit in. That they wanted me to have on a blue suit, not the green suit that I wore. They wanted me to have on a gray suit, not the brown with the gold pinstripe suit that I had on. They told me that my gangster pinstripe suit was not the move. But guess what? I was comfortable in that. And so I want to spend the rest of the time this morning giving you 3 important points on how you can build executive presence. I already told you what it looks like. It is confidence, it's clarity, it's credibility, and it's consistency. But now I want to demystify for you how you actually build it. And it's 3 things. It's 3 simple things. The first is, when you get into the room, is you need to speak with purpose and not just perfection. Speak with purpose and not just perfection. And what do I mean, speak with purpose? That when you have something to say, then you need to say it. Like, I had a conversation with an executive recently. I was just telling someone about this on a podcast prep call yesterday, that there's an executive who is at the C-suite table. He's around the table for a reason. But every time they have a discussion about something that's unrelated to his work, he never wants to say anything, because he's like, y'all don't really care about my opinion. The point is this: when you're at the executive table, your opinion matters all the time, even about stuff in which you don't manage, that you don't oversee. So you have to understand that when you speak with purpose about the things that people need to know at the C-suite. It's not about perfection, like the right diction or using the right words. Like, I used to quote hip hop artists and rap lyrics, Biggie lyrics, Jay-Z lyrics all the time in meetings. I still do, because that's how I get my point across. And I can relate the analogy of saying that, Nas always says this, and he said this in his song, Hate Me Now. People fear what they don't understand, hate what they can't conquer. I guess that's just a theory of man. So then I went on to explain that when people fear what they don't understand, that if they don't understand the decision that we made as a C-suite team, they're going to be afraid of the change. So we as a leadership team need to make sure that they're not afraid. So we got to make sure that they understand. Again, I use the hip hop quote. People fear what they don't understand, hate what they can't conquer. I guess it's just a theory of man. Then I broke it down to the executive team that y'all, we need to have more transparency in our communication about why we're making these changes, because the team doesn't understand. If they don't understand it, they're going to be afraid and resist the change. And change management tells you you can't have people afraid and resisting a change. So you got to demystify and break it down. So that's how I would speak with purpose and not perfection. I know it ain't perfect to use a Nas quote unless you're a hip hop head at the C-suite, but I found a way to weave it in. And you know what was shocking? That half the people around the table knew the Nas quote, because I'm sitting at an executive table with half of an executive team who are in their 40s and 50s, just like I am. So in 1999, they were in their late 20s listening to hip hop like I was listening to hip hop. So number one, if you want to build executive presence, you got to learn how to speak with purpose and not perfection. And the second thing, if you want to build executive presence, you got to command the room by grounding yourself. You got to own the room. Owning and commanding the room by grounding yourself. Now, what does grounding yourself mean? For some people, it might be an affirmation. Do you have an affirmational statement that you read to yourself every morning, or that you read before you walk into the big meeting? If you don't, you might want to consider developing some affirmations. I have affirmations that I've been saying to myself for the better part of a year and a half now. I wasn't an affirmation guy before. But then when I started writing the affirmation, I realized that I can't do standard affirmations. See, standard affirmations don't really ground me. They sound like platitudes and fictitious statements that don't make sense. So you know what I did? I rewrote my affirmations into a 16-bar rhyme. Because again, hip hop is who I am. That's authentically connected to who I am. So I wrote it into a rhyme. But before I wrote it into a rhyme and before I had affirmations, I used to say my favorite rappers' lines before I walked into a room. So like if I had to walk into a room to deliver a presentation to a team full of leaders, and I really needed to make sure that my message landed the way it needed to be, here was how I grounded myself before I walked into the room. I would sing Eric B. and Rakim's Move the Crowd. And I would sing this part of the verse. How can I move this crowd? First of all, ain't no mistakes allowed. Here's the instructions. Put it together. It's simple, ain't it? And quite clever. That was my way of saying that I'm going to move this crowd with some simple information and instructions that ain't going to be super clever, but it's actually going to land the way it needed to land. So I commanded the room like Rakim would command the stage. I commanded the room like LL Cool J would command the stage. That confidence for me came from grounding myself in some words that gave me a sense of command and control. So what am I telling you to do? I'm not telling you to become a rapper or do what I do, but I'm telling you, you got to ground yourself, maybe with an affirmation, maybe with a poem, maybe with a song that you listen to. Or maybe you might need to be like my wife and have to actually go outside and take your shoes off and ground yourself with the earth, and to make yourself feel unmovable like the earth is unmovable. That we're not going to get knocked out of our planetary orbit anytime soon by anything whatsoever. So you have to command the room by grounding yourself, whatever grounding means for you. For me, it's an affirmation now. Before, it was a rhyme that might have music attached to it. You got to find a way to ground yourself. That's how you build executive presence. Now, here's the third thing that you need to do to build executive presence is that you need to lead with values just as much as you lead with vision. See, every C-suite executive has a vision for their area of work. So if you're the CEO, you got a vision for the company. If you're the chief operating officer, you got a vision for operations. If you're the chief marketing officer, you got a vision for the brand. Everybody got a vision for whatever they're in charge of if they're at the C-suite table, if they are a senior executive. But the question is your vision connected to your values? Do you know what your values are? Now, when I say values, I'm not talking about your organizational values. I'm not talking about those 5 words that are on the wall in the entire building or the 5 words that everybody opens up the meeting with. No, those are the company values. What are your values? And are your values embedded in your vision? Are they connected to your vision? See, the reason why you have to have your values connected to your vision is because values are your non-negotiable. These are the things that you won't compromise no matter what's going on in the workplace. So you don't ever have to worry about crossing unethical lines if you know your values, if you lead with your values. So my context for you is that you have to know your values and state what your values are. So my question for you, do you know yours? Do you have any? If you got values, I want you to post them in the chat. What are your values? Let me tell you mine. First value for me is service. I believe that the greatest leaders recognize that they should serve people before they try to lead them. That service is the prerequisite leadership. That if you want to call yourself a leader or be in the C-suite and be the executive, you got to learn to serve first. And no matter what I do, service is going to be in front of everything. Service is a prerequisite of leadership. The second thing I will say is a value for me and let you know what my value is. It's empowerment. That it's not good enough just to serve people, but it's my job to empower them. That's the reason why I have a platform like this, is because I'm giving you the good stuff. I'm not hiding it in a book. I'm not hiding it behind a paywall where you got to pay for it. I'm giving you the stuff up front. I want to empower you to become an executive with lots of presence and be effective at the C-suite level, at the senior level. So empowerment is a value for me, which means I'm going to give you the tools. I'm going to give you the information. I'm going to give you the resources that you need to be impactful and to be successful. That's my job. So I'm giving you the tools because empowerment is a value for me. Now, here's a third value for me. The third value for me is justice. That's right, the word justice. And when I say justice, I'm really talking about something very simple. And that is, there is never a wrong time to do the right thing. That in every organization, there are going to be situations that you walk into as a senior leader where you're going to learn about something wrong. As a matter of fact, most C-suite table conversations are not about all of the things that are going right, but it's about the problem that we have going wrong. Actually, you spend the most time, if you have a 90-minute L10 leadership meeting, you should get through most of the business in about an hour. But then you leave at least 30 minutes, 45 minutes talking about a big problem. And the point of talking about the problem is that you need to figure out how to solve the problem and make it right. See, that's a value for me, is that I want to be focused on figuring out what's wrong and then figuring out what it takes to make it right and doing something to make it right. That's a value for me. And I'm going to give you a fourth value. It's about action. It's never just about knowing what's wrong or knowing that you can serve or knowing that you can empower people. But what are we going to take action on? Can't just build a list of all of the things wrong and don't knock anything off the list. You got to take some action. So I'm closing with this point, that third way for you to build executive presence is about making sure you know your values and that you lead with your values as much as you lead with your vision. People need a vision. They need to see the vision. But that vision should be connected to some values, your values as a leader. And here's my final word as I close out today. And I see a few things in the comment. Someone said, that I had good executive presence because I'm fit. No one deals with an overweight executive. That ain't true, because back in the 90s, I was 300 plus pounds and my suit was very large. I mean, like I had a 56-inch coat. I was big and I was hiding my belly underneath of it. And there's plenty of photos that you can see of me as a big dude in an executive room in an executive suit. As a matter of fact, I got a photo of me in the Oval Office with the President of the United States, where he's sitting down on the Resolute desk listening to me, and I'm big as a house. I'm definitely 300 plus pounds in that photograph. Matter of fact, I make a joke and say, that's not Anton Gunn in that photograph. That's Anton Glutton. I was a real big dude. So you can be big and be an executive, because it's more about how you show up, not just what you look like, but what you have to say, what your knowledge and insights are. And yes, I'm always going to encourage people to be healthy. I'm so glad I lost all of that weight. I feel much better. And yes, there is a connection to some degree to how you look. So if you are big and sloppy, that's a problem. But I wasn't big and sloppy. I had on a fresh suit. It was different than everybody else's suit. And I wasn't disheveled. My shirt was never untucked. My tie was never, looking all crazy. So there is a measure connected to that. But I wanted to point out that, again, this is about how you speak with purpose, not perfection. How you command the room by grounding yourself. And number 3, how you lead with your values as much as you lead with your vision. Those are the 3 things that are connected to how do you build executive presence. Speaking with purpose. You got to speak with purpose. You got to command the room by grounding yourself. And number 3, you got to lead with values, not just your vision. So now I'm going to go to my final word, okay? So don't let anybody define leadership for you. This ain't about code switching. This ain't about, never using the word ain't, as I said ain't like 4 or 5 times. This is about knowing who you are as a leader and also knowing the place where you are. There's a time and a place for everything. And if you want to get to that next level as a leader, if you want to find your pathway to the C-suite, you have to know and understand executive presence. So I'm going to encourage you to go to my blog, antongunn.com/blog. I have a blog posted today, right now, that gives you more insight about executive presence. And there's a free download there, an executive presence worksheet that's available for you, but you're only going to get it if you go to my blog at antongunn.com/blog and read the whole piece that I have about executive presence, and you can get this download that will help you. I want to thank you for your time and your attention for another episode of Leadership Live with Anton Gunn. I will see you next week. Everybody, make it a great day. Take care.